So as with the logo itself, I've given you a starting point here with this AI file sample labels. And essentially, again, we just need one of these options. This top row are the front facing label. I would suggest using the same for the front of a box and the front of the candle votive. Although one of these in my example will be a sticker and the other will actually be printed onto the box. So these still use live text, so you could make your customizations here. If you want, you can change the fragrance at the bottom, but I would suggest copying and pasting your chosen logo onto the artboards you want to use, and just delete the artboards you don't want to use. But this is where, if you do give yourself a few different versions, when we come to Adobe Dimension, you'll be able to try out a number of options and see what works best. So you may even want to create additional versions. To do that, if you open up the artboard tool, which is Shift O, and hold Alt and drag to duplicate an artboard. And with that duplicate, for example, if I wanted a version where we just have white text on a transparent background, I can select this, click the white swatch, and there I've now got that ready to export. So create different versions if you wish until you have something you're happy with. You're free to deviate from this. This is just an example I've given you as a starting point. So we have a simple kind of key line that just ties in the fragrance at the bottom here. But you could really create anything you like. And for the ingredients and a little Our Story label I've created, which I think is a nice touch. The brand in my sample is the Ornate Orchid, and so I've got this simple artwork with the opacity toned down to 40%, just two flowers from orchids to kind of decorate this. I may or may not use that. If I didn't want them, I could just select and delete them away. We've got a web link at the bottom and just Latin placeholder text, but it will kind of paint a more realistic sample of the way this packaging might look. I think adding little touches like that. So here are the placeholders. Feel free to customize and tweak them. You can change the fonts, of course, change the colors, and you can duplicate to create as many variations as you like. Another factor is that for the purpose of this demo, I've just eyeballed the sizes. I've literally just come up with something that I liked the look and the proportions of. In a real world project, you would carefully size each of these labels. So for example, if I bring up the artboard tool again, Shift O, and I make sure I've got this label here selected. If you look over in the properties panel, and appreciate if you're on a mobile device, this is going to look very small. But you have a width and a height value over in the two right boxes here. So you can simply type in, let's say it was 2000 pixels by 1500 pixels, and that would size it accordingly. You can also type in other dimensions. So you could do 20 cm by 30 cm, and Illustrator will actually convert that for you into pixels depending on the resolution you're working at. So in a real world project, you'd plug in those sizes very carefully, and you'd also want to include a bleed on the edge of the artwork. And if you don't know how, you can do that by simply going to File, Document Setup, and here you can add a bleed. 3mm would be standard. And essentially what that means, it wouldn't be such a problem for a label like this. There's nothing to bleed off the edge. But for this label, for example, it gives a little bit of freedom for the printer. So you would need to stretch your artwork all the way to that bleed. And that way, even though the printer is aiming to cut along this black line for this label, he's got a little bit of a margin for error. So just a little tip in case you were working on a real world project. But for the purposes of this demo, when you're happy with some labels you've prepared, simply go to File, Export, and not export for screens, but export as. And you can use any file name you like, but you want to select Use Artboards and all. And when you export that, you'll have some options, resolution and anti-aliasing, as well as background color. So I would make sure the background color is set to transparent. You'll want that for some of your labels. For anti-aliasing, I would definitely choose type optimized. And for the resolution, Dimension actually supports a maximum of 2000 pixels longest width for any artwork you import. So I found it works better to work at screen resolution. Things actually appear sharper in Dimension than if you export huge artwork files and then Dimension has to downscale them itself, which makes it run a little slower too. So I would use these settings here and hit OK when you're happy and save out your labels.